what the fuck are you doing? Like, what are you doing with your life? You need to get your shit together. And so in those moments of clarity and really upsetting, truthful moments of just like, oh, wow, I'm not living the life that I could be living, I started to make big changes. And from the outside looking in, it probably looked like I literally dropped a bomb in my life and exploded everything. But I truly believe that without destruction, there is no room for growth.
The big question is this: how do we take a seemingly ordinary world and make it beyond extraordinary? In yoga, there is so much more than meets the eye, and it's not just the things we do on our yoga mats that make the biggest difference. That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answer. My name is Austin Bitsis, and welcome to Life as a Secret Yogi. We have Sarah Kadel on the show. She's a yoga teacher, Reiki master. She's Pilates instructor, personal trainer, and the list goes on. She leads international yoga retreats, directs yoga teacher trainings, and does a lot more. What I found really cool was that in Secret Yogi fashion, you served as the yoga teacher for the NFL team, the Rams, a little while back. Your work has been featured in the Elephant Journal, Yoga Trade, Insight Meditation app, and Yoga International. So grateful to have you on the show, Sarah. And not just because of your qualifications, but we spoke on the phone, and you have a very authentic story, and you really live this life of like peace, kindness, and radiance. So I'm grateful to have you on the show and hear your life as a secret yogi.
Well, thanks for having me, Austin. I'm really excited to share a little bit about my journey in hopes that it maybe resonates with some folks that need to hear it.
Yeah, definitely. And so just to start off a little bit about the audience. The audience are those who want to take the practice of yoga and meditation, among other related tools, into the real world. It's a lot of people who are looking to perform at a higher level in other practices, such as like running, golf, art, music, entrepreneurship, and so on. So to put it simply, those who just want to live a beautiful life and utilize the tools of yoga and meditation to help them live that beautiful life. And the audience does not necessarily want to become the stereotypical yogi or yoga teacher. Nevertheless, the audience would like to kind of utilize these tools of yoga and meditation to make life beautiful, or as I always put it, to make a seemingly ordinary world extraordinary. In short, the message of the Secret Yogi is that we all have this heroic self, and it's our inner source that we cultivate through the tools of yoga to make a seemingly ordinary world extraordinary. It's that we all have this superhero that lives within, and yoga and meditation allows us to tap into these superpowers. Our superpowers being like mindfulness, awareness, love, focus, creating happiness, and just a peaceful, beautiful world, and ultimately feel good in a body that we love. So our minds are this complex Rubik's Cube, and that's where we really focus on this show. And decoding the puzzle that we kind of carry on our shoulders seems to be the gateway to seeing the beauty all around us. And yoga and meditation helps us remove the layer of physical tension built up over time, as well as our mental obstacles, may they be our thoughts, our emotions, our self-limiting beliefs. And there's really no other practice like yoga and meditation. So I'm super excited to talk to you about that. And how you doing today? That's a long introduction.
I love that introduction. I'm like, wow, can I have that in writing?
Yeah. Have it right here. I can share it.
I love it. I think you like really just in your words and embody what yoga is. And like you said, I think there's this like outside view of perhaps what yoga might be, and our misconceptions or our ideas that we have about what yoga could be. It's so much more than just the movements. It's so much more than sitting in stillness and it is all yoga, but what it gives us on the other side, right? Of being more sensitive. We become sensitive creatures by doing these practices, so that not only are we more in tune with like the subtle rhythms and shifts of nature all around us, and that really makes like the world more vibrant and intense in some ways, but it also improves our interoception, right? So like our awareness, our self-observation, where we're like, hey, what's going on inside? Like, is the, the automatic autopilot machine sort of running the show right now? Or am I actually like totally in tune and present and mindful with what I'm doing? That's totally what yoga has given me. So I'm super psyched about everything you just said.
Awesome. Yeah. No, it's really yeah, awesome that we could create a whole show around yoga and meditation. And when traditionally people think it's something that's more visual because it's something that's physical, and in reality, it's something that's such physical is such a small part of it, the physical practice of yoga.
Totally.
And as a podcast, you could explain the poses, but it's really hard to kind of teach people the classes. And I really wanted to focus on basically the aspect of the whole other aspect that's not spoken to as much, which is the mental practice of yoga and meditation. So as if life was a movie, let's rewind to the point of your life when you were living in Germany, working with the amazing Crystal Beshears from episodes 1 and 2. We spoke about that you worked with her for a little while, and I really would like to know what drove you to this point, and where were you in life?
All right. Well, so yeah, Crystal and I met through mutual friends that sent like us an email and was like, "Hey, you're in Germany, so is my friend Crystal," and hooked us up together. And the very first time Crystal and I actually met in person, she was living about 2 hours north of where I was in Germany. I was more towards Frankfurt and she was further north, but she found this amazing workshop that was taking place in Frankfurt and asked me if I wanted to go. So I met her at this studio in Frankfurt, and we were, I think, the only two Americans there. And the teacher was Megan Curry, who's Canadian. So she spoke English, but pretty much no one else did. And her and I just had the time of our lives. We literally got our asses kicked in that workshop. We were dying, and we really bonded through that experience together. It was such a intense and powerful and strengthening workshop. And I think we always look back and laugh about how sore we were for days after that. But that was really how our friendship started, and we collaborated quite a bit. I ended up moving, to the military base that she was living by up north. And she really hooked me up and got me a job opportunity working on the base there with the service members. And then she departed shortly after that. So our time together in Germany was really short. I was really there for the tail end of her journey there. And then she moved back to Arkansas. And a few years later, I moved to the Kansas City area. So not exactly very close, but closer than we were actually when we lived together in Germany. So she had invited me to come down and teach philosophy at her yoga teacher trainings that were taking place in Arkansas. And yeah, so we just sort of started this amazing collaboration. And Crystal is so important to me because she really taught me what it means to collaborate with other professionals. Up until that point, there was not very many opportunities, whether I wasn't seeking them out or I wasn't open to them, or who knows, I wasn't ready for them perhaps in my journey. But Crystal really taught me what it's like to collaborate as professionals and create something where you each have different complementary skills, and she really fills in the gaps of things that I'm missing. She is a profound space holder. She has her PhD in education. I'm sure you know that from interviewing her, and just the way that she can facilitate space and elicit conversation, like deep, meaningful conversation, is just so skillful. And that's not a skill that I am really expert at yet. So I learn a lot from Crystal, and I'm just so happy to be able to collaborate with people that are really, really good at what they do.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think that kind of triggered like two things in my mind, where it's like this notion of like abundance and this mindset of abundance, where it's like there's enough to go around, and kind of going out
Absolutely.
with this love for the professionals that are doing the same things that you're doing. And there's that mindset of abundance, and there's enough to go around, and you could create beautiful things. And you always find that there's strengths and weaknesses, and kind of that yin and that yang and that balance, and creating something that is, and working with other people is really great. So that's awesome. And on your story, let's unpack that a little bit more, where it's like, what kind of led you to Germany and to teaching yoga there, and what really got you into yoga in the first place?
Yeah, so that's a big part of my story. So I'm originally from Connecticut. It's been, I think about 13, almost 14 years since I've lived in Connecticut. So it's
Mhm.
been a while, but my mom is still there. So I visit often. And I'm currently in North Carolina. So it's a lot of jumping around. But immediately after I graduated college in Connecticut, I took off to the Virgin Islands and I moved to the island of St. John. So it's one of the U.S. Virgin Islands, and I was living in a treehouse, literally at this like
That's
eco
pretty cool.
resort. It was pretty awesome. Unfortunately, the eco village is no longer there, but it holds a very big place in my heart and my journey. And then I decided that I was going to stay in the Caribbean. I only planned on being there for a month for a work exchange, and fell in love with the island, fell in love with the culture, made amazing friends and connections. And so instead of going back to Connecticut, where I was going to start my graduate program, I decided to unenroll from all of my school with the support of my mom, which was so important. She's like, you've only got this one life. Do what feels exciting and fun. And if you end up deciding that it was the wrong choice, you can always come back and do it again. I'm like, oh, okay.
That's an awesome role
Yeah,
model you have there.
it
Yeah.
was really great. I mean, she really empowered me to find that freedom, right, of choice
Mhm.
and not worrying so much about failure, just kind of jumping into the unknown. And so I lived in the Virgin Islands. It turned into 6 years. And I ended up moving to the bigger island of St. Thomas. And I'm sure there's a lot of folks that have visited there, whether it's cruise ships or, vacations. It's a very big tourist hotspot. But while I was living there, the island culture, it's really dynamic and fun and a little bit wild, like there's this whole idea of like a pirate life. And so partying was a huge part of my life. Well, it really kind of always was from like the time I was 15, honestly. And yeah, it just kind of got away from me, partying way too much. And I have a very addictive personality as well as genetically prone to addiction. And so things really got out of hand. And I don't know if I would have noticed that things had gotten out of hand if it wasn't for my friends dragging me to yoga in like a really hungover state one morning when I was just like in a particular downward spiral. And I remember thinking, like, this is horrific. I hated the class so much because I felt awful. And I was so dissociated from my own body, just from the years and years of drugs and alcohol, and like just so disconnected. Like, I didn't know what it meant to, lengthen my heels to the floor. Like, what are you talking about? And like, I just remember down dog felt so terrible in my upper back and shoulders. Like, I'll never forget it. But after the class in Shavasana, it sounds like really cliche, and like maybe you hear these things all the time or read about them in stories or see them on Instagram, where it's like in Shavasana, I truly had this profound feeling that things could be different, that, I didn't have to constantly be surviving. Like there was an opportunity to really connect with that deeper potential for harmony and for balance and for sensitivity and honesty and self-observation, right? Instead of just constantly running away from whatever it was I was running away from, past traumas, and covering all that up with addictive behaviors, right? Which I'm not demonizing at all. I think addiction is just another defense mechanism that we use, a survival mechanism. But yeah, so yoga was really forced upon me. The physical practices, I had actually, interestingly enough, I think I was always destined to find yoga. I had studied comparative religions in high school and also in college. And one of my biggest points of interest was Eastern thought and religion. And so I was very, very familiar with like Vedic texts already, even though I had no idea what downward facing dog was. And I didn't know how to breathe at all. But eventually I stuck with the physical practice while I lived in the Virgin Islands. And I met my teacher, Robin, who's based out of St. Louis. And eventually started going to a teacher training while I lived there. And yeah, that was sort of how it all happened. And in teacher training, it was like a domino effect, a chain reaction that, okay, now I'm like in this place of self-observation and getting still and having to like literally look at myself with this discernment and observation. And even though we're not supposed to be like judgmental of ourselves, there was a lot of judgment of like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, what are you doing with your life? You need to get your shit together. And so in those moments of clarity and really upsetting, truthful moments of just like, oh, wow, I'm not living the life that I could be living. I started to make big changes. And from the outside looking in, it probably looked like I literally dropped a bomb in my life and exploded everything. But I truly believe that without destruction, there is no room for growth, right? Like we need to make space to clear out the old stuff to make room for new growth, right? And so, yeah, from the outside looking in, it probably looked like I was being really reckless and destructive. And I was being destructive. I was, quitting jobs, quitting relationships. I moved to a completely different area of the island where I knew no one could even access me. Because I understood that I had a deep, deep need for some healing, and that couldn't be done with any of the external influences that I was currently a part of. And so I really isolated myself in some ways. And, I found that deep healing in my little studio apartment that I rented by myself with my dog, and just did a lot of walks and a lot of yoga and a lot of studying, and really poured myself into it. And unfortunately for me, sobriety didn't come as easily. About 6 years later, maybe, was when I found my sobriety, but I definitely had awakened to the possibility of change. So that's what
Yeah.
got me into yoga. And the reason I moved to Germany was because I ended up meeting my now husband while I was still living in the Virgin Islands, and he is active duty in the Army and was currently stationed in Germany. And yeah, so that's that story. I ended up in Germany.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it sounds like it's a story of kind of replacing habits and like replacing bad habits that you were kind of down this road and you switched them, and you were aware enough to realize, I mean, of course, with the help of your community, of your friends, and the people close to you, which is super important, because
Yeah.
sometimes it's not just your awareness and our awareness and the audience listening right now, it's the people that you surround yourself that can call you out on things and set you in the right direction. So then you can become more aware. And I always like to say, and this kind of something I say with my girlfriend, it's like when we both are aware, we both are working towards something. It's not that we're working twice the speed, we're working 4 times the speed. So when you have a community, I mean, that's tenfold, like for the people that you're around, and you could really work towards something great. And you kind of mentioned something before, which is like sobriety didn't come for about 6 years after. And that was kind of my question. Was it really smooth sailing, or was there any difficulties or many difficulties kind of along the way and obstacles you had to overcome?
Oh, I don't know if anyone's sobriety journey is smooth sailing or life in general. Yeah, no, it was, moments of thinking that I had things under control. There's always these, addiction is so sneaky, right? The addictive brain is really, really good at tricking you into thinking that you don't have a problem, or that, oh, okay, well, if I have moderation or have whatever, that's enough. And for some folks that works, right? So like not everyone's journey looks the same. Like this is just from my own experience. I'm in no way like a sober monolith. But yeah, it took many, many years of, I'm going to quit for a few weeks. I'm going to quit for a few months. Or, I think the longest I ever made it was 6 months before, getting back into it. And so it wasn't until I met my good friend Mary, actually, that has a really amazing journey with sobriety as well. And we met in Mexico at another, yoga training. I just remember having a conversation with her years later, like maybe 2 or 3 years after I met her. We were hosting a retreat together in Bali. And, I said to her, I'm like, I'm so just mesmerized by your ability to stay sober. I'm like, our culture, it's like you're celebrating something, have a drink. You're mourning something, have a drink. You're bored, have a drink. It's a sunny day, have a drink. It's a rainy day, have a drink. And so it's like you're constantly bombarded with just that culture, which, for folks that don't have an addictive personality, that's probably okay for them to navigate. But for me, it was really challenging. And I'll never forget the moment of like true awakening for me about what I needed to do in terms of my sobriety. Was she just looked me dead in the eye and was like, you have to realize that people that don't have addiction don't constantly think, do I have a problem? Do I have an addiction? Like they're just living their lives. And I was like, huh, interesting. And so she introduced me to Yoga for 12 Steps of Recovery with Nikki Myers, which I had the honor of completing their training not too long ago. So I can now facilitate like, non-denominational, non-theistic sobriety circles, 12-step recovery based. And so my journey really began in Bali, and it was after quite the bender that I had had leading up to arriving in Bali. So, it was tricky. And I think when your friends are used to you being like, the life of the party, or always having like a good time, always down to, get wild or whatever, I think that's the hardest part, at least it was for me, was, coming clean with my friends and being like, hey, look, like I've made this decision to not drink anymore, and I really need your support on it. And everyone was super supportive. My husband was wonderful. My friends were really great. And that was what I was worried the most about was, would they be afraid that I wasn't going to be fun anymore or whatever? And so, I've created my own little path of how I stay sober, which is I always have like really delicious herbal teas or, something fun to drink. Whenever I go to a party, I bring my, my big glass jug that I've made of whatever beverage I'm planning on drinking. And that really still keeps me feeling like I'm included and not just standing there like, someone that's sober.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I think what you're talking about of like occasions and the peer pressure around it. And again, it's kind of going off on the community and making sure that you're surrounded around the right people to kind of push positive influences on you. And that's been a big part of not only my own life in terms of just like the influences of, you were saying like every time there's you're celebrating something or you're going out, or it's just always centered around drinking or eating. And for somebody like myself, the audience, yourself, who wants to live a healthy lifestyle, it's hard. And to make that association every time we want to go have fun and go hang out, it's like you have to either drink or eat food that might not be as good. And surrounding yourself with people that also have like-minded goals is huge, because then it goes to the whole aspect of like, okay, what can we do together that's different? But it's just as fun. Like when I remember when I was in high school, actually even in college, and every time I hung out with a friend, we all ran collegiately. We all ran like high level in like running. I was in like track and field and cross country, and we always just met up at a park. We ran, and then we got some food after, and it was like this like great feeling of like I just hung out with my buddy for a couple hours. We worked out and we were outside and we felt great. And then after college, everyone's working corporate careers and kind of the running kind of slowed down. It's like every time I wanted to hang out with my friends, it was like, okay, let's go to the bar. Let's meet up at 11 o'clock at night. And I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, this is not me. And it really took time of like, probably I felt very isolated. Like I was in my own quarantine for a little while. And you might be able to relate to that until you find like, okay, these are the friends that actually want to do stuff. And you kind of keep putting it out there. Hey, you want to just go for this walk, or you want to go to this yoga class and we could grab breakfast after, or something like that. And I think that's great. And you also mentioned, you're talking about sobriety, but I think this also entails many obstacles personally. If you're trying to lose weight, if there's so many obstacles that people are trying to deal with, self-doubt, maybe it's it's like self-doubt, losing weight. There's so many different obstacles. And can you talk more about overcoming obstacles and kind of any advice you would give to somebody who's trying to overcome say a large obstacle such as you went through?
Yeah, so I think it's important to remember that, we only know as much as we know in that moment, right? And
Hmm.
so to not beat ourselves up, like I ever so often will get in the trap of like looking back at, just the horrific behavior that I partook in, right? That was totally my responsibility and I'm totally accountable for while I was drinking and partying, right? If you get stuck in that trap of just like lamenting and beating yourself up and self-loathing, there's no forward progress, right? You're stuck in that past place. You're stuck in those emotions, right? So like our brain is so powerful. If we start just ruminating on those past mistakes and things that we're ashamed of or whatever it might be, like our entire emotional center, our nervous system goes into those memories with us. And so like we easily start to feel like really depressed or dissociated or anxious or shameful or guilty, whatever it might be, right? And so there's no room for growth in those areas. So just like I said before, how, without destruction of some kind, without creating space of some kind for something new to grow and to blossom and to flourish, nothing changes, right? And so we need to be willing to acknowledge what we've done and then be like, and now I'm choosing. Now I have choice, right? I'm going to choose to do something differently. I'm going to choose to act differently, to think differently, to respond differently, right? One of my favorite quotes is that there's, between stimulus and response, there's a pause, right? And in that pause, there's freedom. And I really find that we have those moments of freedom, especially if you're practicing yoga and mindfulness or meditation. When we're encountered with one of our obstacles, do we automatically put up the walls? Do we shut down? Do we get defensive? Do we, do we go back? Do we revert to our old ways? Like, how are we meeting those obstacles? And do we have a path? Do we have a plan forward? Right? So like, think proactively. Okay, like I know life isn't easy. Whatever obstacles I've got, whether it's various forms of addiction or it's your own mind getting in your way, right? So like you said, self-doubt, or maybe it's imposter syndrome, things like that, or self-limiting thoughts. Get really, really intimate with that inner dialogue, with that inner critic. And then have some action plans. Okay, so I know that when I start questioning myself or thinking I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, or I feel anxious, and so I need one of my crutches to carry me through. It's like, have an action plan. Okay, I know that when I'm getting anxious, which is very often, when I feel myself starting to spiral, I've got a bunch of options, right? Like I can grab a bottle of wine, or I can, mindlessly eat sweets. Like that's my other addiction. I just love all sweets in front of me. Or I can dissociate and, just zone out on the computer, on a screen or whatever. Or I can choose to just stop everything I'm doing, literally hit the pause button and go outside, go for a walk with my dog, sit outside, take, 5 deep breaths. One of my teachers says, if you breathe, everything changes. So just pause for a second, take a super deep breath, and see how you are on the other side of that breath. And then if nothing has changed, take another breath and see if it's changed. So I guess my advice, if you're, really working through something, which I think all of us are working through something right now, we're going through like this massive collective trauma as a world. Have a plan of action, know your tendencies, self-observation, right? Like know your tendencies, know what triggers you, what starts to spiral you, what maybe gets you into these places that you feel like you can't climb out of. Have someone that you can reach out to, whether it's a trusted friend or a therapist, whatever it might be, your community of some kind. And have that action plan in place so that when you encounter whatever it is that sort of throws you off your center, you know where to go. It's like, okay, hold on, I've got this moment, right? And of course that takes like huge amount of self-awareness, observation, and also discipline, right? Like you have to be really committed to your self-growth and your transformation and to change, to hit the brakes in that moment, right? It's like hit the brakes in that moment before you collide into whatever it is you're headed towards full speed. Hit the brakes and then choose what's next instead of just moving, down the path like a snowball out of control.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's a huge part of yoga and meditation is that self-reflection and creating that awareness and just sitting in and realizing like what's going on. Okay, I now realize like what's going on, or I think I realize what's going on. And of course, again, community helps in having somebody that could like a mentor or somebody like that. But in that aspect, it's like, okay, deep breath, or maybe it's a meditative practice, or maybe it's a yoga practice, or maybe it's just simply going for a walk and a moving meditation and just being out in nature. That's what I did this weekend. I was working too many hours the past few weeks, and my girlfriend dragged me out, and we went. I can't even call camping. It was kind of glamping. It was like these tents. I think I saw a picture of you in like maybe it was I forgot where. It's like those tents, like the canvas tents.
Oh, I think that was in Mexico.
Yeah, and I did that this weekend upstate in the Catskills,
Nice.
and just like taking that time, and it wasn't a formal practice, but I think also there's something to be said about a formal practice. And once you kind of, and I think this is actually something Crystal said, where it's like this formal practice of meditation and yoga helps kind of train you to become aware. And then over time, now you could kind of integrate that into the real world and take your yoga practice, your meditation practice, your breathing practice into the real world.
For sure.
Um,
For sure. And I think that even, I'm talking a lot about having like an action plan of things to move forward, but there's also a necessary unlearning that needs to happen too, right? So like really looking at, those habits, those patterns, and be willing to recognize them and unlearn them, which is so challenging, right? Requires a great deal of effort.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think they always talk about it. What is it, like 21 days and you learn a new habit, but what about unlearning the bad habits? And
Right.
also that kind of goes into the question of like, okay, well, if I'm unlearning it, what habits am I replacing them with? And you actually spoke about something. It sounds like it's related. It's the difference between coping mechanisms and survival mechanisms. Would you be able to explain more about that?
I think that they're similar in a lot of ways. And, of course, I'm not like a mental health professional, but in my own experiences, our survival mechanisms are things like little habits, perhaps, that we pick up along the way, starting as early as childhood, perhaps, that, we needed in that moment. And to truly survive, whether it's, shutting down or lashing out or, self-soothing techniques that really served their purpose in the moment to help us survive through, difficult traumas. But, our circumstances almost always change, right? So like whatever circumstance we were in when those survival techniques were appropriate, we might not be in that same situation anymore. And so how do we recognize that, like, oh, okay, like not feel guilty about this survival technique I had, whatever it was, it doesn't serve me anymore in this moment again. And so that requires a great deal of willingness to be present, right? And to truly see like what the truth is that's going on around you. So it's really easy to get caught up in our minds and think like, oh, this is still really necessary. I still need this. But really it's just become something we're something we're
Mhm.
attached to, or a habit that we just don't really think twice about until maybe it's drawn to our attention by someone we love or trust or whatever. And it's like, hey, do you realize, you do this thing, like I'll get very defensive if I feel like my intelligence is being challenged. And that comes from like this place of being a child and not taking seriously and feeling like no one was listening to me,
Mhm.
right? And so realizing now, like, okay, I'm 34 years old, I'm a professional, I'm educated, I understand a lot about how the world works, not everything, but I understand a lot about it. Getting defensive is probably not appropriate anymore. It was a survival mechanism back then, but right now I don't really need that. So how can I be more open to listening and actually listening instead of feeling like, okay, I have to fight, and prove myself or whatever it
Mhm.
might be, and realize that it's not appropriate anymore, and that was a useful survival mechanism in the past, and it no longer is, right? And so be willing to see that and to perhaps offer up new opportunities for listening and for growth. And then on the flip side, I think coping mechanisms are really, at least for me, again, in my own experience, when things are happening in the moment that we don't necessarily have like built-in survival techniques for yet, and it's painful or it's too intense and we don't want to deal with it, then those coping mechanisms kick in, And so one of my coping mechanisms that I know I do right now and I'm working on is immediately when things start to get too intense for me, I shut down. I'm like, I need a nap, right? And I'm a big proponent of napping. I think that everyone should nap as often as they can. However, I was using napping as a way to run away from the thing, whatever the thing is that I'm dealing with. We've got a lot of changes coming up this year for us, and they become very quickly overwhelming. In the middle of a pandemic, why not change, your whole life? So anyway, now that we're dealing with that added stress of transitioning our lives into a whole nother realm of possibility. My husband's separating from the military in the middle of this pandemic. I tend to find myself napping a lot more than I probably should be. And so now when I feel myself starting to shut down or get like okay, I just need to run away from this problem, I'm going outside instead and getting some sun or going for a little walk or breathing or whatever it might be. And then I come back and I'm like, okay, let me look at this problem again with fresh eyes and see if I can approach it with a little bit more, sound mind and balance instead of reactivity. So yeah, I think that hopefully that answers the
Yeah,
question.
no, definitely. And I mean, I love napping. I wish I had more time to nap in that case, because I feel like this sense of creativity when I nap, it's almost like this lucid dreaming state, and I love it. And I just never give myself the chance to nap. Before I know it, it's like already 10:30 at night, and I'm like, tomorrow, and it just never happens. It's like I always do the extra half an hour of yoga practice or go for a run, whatever. But I would love to break down more of like kind of integrating yoga and meditation, your breathing techniques, and specific habits that you utilized. I think one question is, okay, one, what are your like non-negotiables, and what tools do you utilize in terms of yoga, meditation, and breathing techniques? And that's like now looking into like we talk about self-reflection. What does it look like to you? Is it writing down? And then also on the second part of the question, which is sometimes not always asked, is like, what tools helped you get where you are today and kind of overcoming sobriety? And that's like a question where I always like to ask, because it's like when you ask a professional athlete, what's your training program look like? And they tell somebody, and usually or sometimes the person asking is somebody who's aspiring athlete, and what got them there is totally different than what they need now, and their program looks like now. But their program to get them to become a professional athlete was totally different. So it's like, what tools did you utilize to overcome the obstacles, and what tools are you utilizing now to kind of maintain and just make life beautiful and live a happy, healthy life? It's
Just
unique
like,
to you.
yeah, just like most tools, we have like a large variety of tools in our toolbox, and not all tools are appropriate for each, job that we might be trying to do. And I think that yoga really provides me with that same set of toolbox options for, self-maintenance, if you will, right? So for those tune-ups when I need them, and then also for like my daily practices. Really, my daily practices lately have consisted of a lot less physical. I haven't been practicing as much asana or vinyasa because I've been teaching a lot more. And teaching online is such a strange world. But while I'm teaching online, I'm primarily practicing while I'm instructing, which is not how I used to teach in real life. In real life, I hardly ever moved with my students. I walked around so that I could, help them and see with my eyes what's going on, so that my cueing was informed by what I saw in real life in real time. So now that I don't have that ability to connect in person with my students, it would feel really weird to just like stare at the camera and just use my words. And so I've been practicing with them, which means I have a lot more asana practice in my life than I typically did before. So I haven't been practicing on my own, which I truly miss, because one of my favorite things to do is to go outside and maybe play some music, maybe not, maybe just listen to, I have a beautiful backyard with lots of birds that we feed. Just listening to nature and just moving without any agenda, without any goals of like, today I'm going to work on, inversions or pressing or whatever it is, just moving however I feel like my body intuitively wants to move. So I do need to get back into that, because I notice I'm now craving that, and I'm needing that inspiration from my own body to inform my teaching. But aside from the asana, I do a lot of breath work. I do breath work when I'm driving. I do breath work when I'm at the computer. I do breath work first thing in the morning, whether it's just like a 3-part breath or like really deep inhales and slow mindful exhales out through my breath. I'm almost always working with the breath. And that is because of my understanding, both intellectually and also sensory, of how the breath impacts the nervous system. And the breath is like our greatest tool for self-regulation. So anyone that's ever feeling anxious, slow down your breath, take deep, mindful inhales and slow, intentional exhales, and things will change, right? Like when you breathe, things will change. So breath work, pranayama, is my go-to for everything. My meditation practice looks a little bit different lately. Working from home, it's really crossed like all the boundaries of like what things go on at home and what things go on at work. Everything is all like intertwined now. So I'm having a hard time negotiating my space and my time with all of that. But my meditation practice is usually, sometimes it's short. It might just be 10 minutes of sitting still. I kind of just feel into it and see like what's going on. And sometimes it's a half hour, sometimes it's longer. It just sort of depends. And I really believe that like the movement can be a meditation for you, right? If you're really mindful and doing things. But also anything is meditation. So a lot of the time my meditation is walking my dog in the morning, like you said, a movement meditation where I purposefully leave my phone at home and I don't take it with me. And I just go for a walk and I just observe everything. And, we talked at the beginning about how yoga and mindfulness makes you such a sensitive, creature, how you observe the subtleties, the rhythms around you, the vibrations of the earth around you. I truly believe that. I now notice like every little detail through the little forest walk that I do, a little hike that I do, where I can smell when something is blooming or when something's decaying, or I can tell, the difference in, we walk through like this low-lying area and then up into like a hill area, and I can feel the difference in temperature and humidity in the air, and just becoming so receptive to what's going on around me without any distractions, and just being really, really in tune. That's really my healing practice right now. And the outside time is non-negotiable for me, for sure. I need that every single day, even if it's just raining and I sit on the back porch and just sit for a few moments. We're so connected right now, which is incredible because we need to be, with the internet and Zoom and everything.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be connected. If we weren't, we wouldn't be able to function right now through the pandemic. At the same time, it's easy to be so overwhelmed and realize that you haven't, taken a break from your screen or stepped outside for some fresh air. And so that is definitely a non-negotiable for me, is outside time for now.
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes I find myself like, I'm like, it's been 2 days, and you mentioned you lived in a treehouse for a little while. I imagine that I'm living in a treehouse. I'm living in an apartment, many stories up. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, sometimes I catch myself and I'm like, wow, I haven't been outside in 2 days, and you don't realize that the stress builds up, and then when I go to meditate, it's like I'm laying down for 10 minutes, but I'm not actually present. I sometimes, and I talked about this on another episode. It's like you need sometimes even a physical practice where it's, if you have trouble meditating, maybe kind of go up to the next level, which is meditating is like the most subtle practice there is. And it's the act of non-doing, but like breathing is a slightly active practice. And then it's like after that, above that is like going for a walk or a run or doing something really physically exerting. And it's hard to kind of have those thoughts sometimes when you're moving. And so that's super powerful. And being in nature is something that's, I think we all need more of. And it's amazing in the summertime, just to be outside in nature. And then it's like you go away, like I was mentioning, I went away this weekend and I just felt like this relief. Like it took me about a day to really feel it. And once I was able to kind of feel it and de-stress, then I was like, I just like practice yoga on myself, like by myself. I did like a meditation yesterday, and it was just like, it just came naturally. And I was able to clear my mind. I went for a run, and my mind wasn't going all over the place. Like it was, my mind's, when people say they have an active mind, I mean, I could easily relate to that. I lay down for meditation, and before I know it, I just came up with like 30 different marketing and business ideas. I just created a whole business in my head. Like it's bad. And I think that's why I love to share this, because I'm utilizing, and I'm in the same place where it's really like kind of this balance of like yin and yang, and doing and non-doing, and making life beautiful with that balance. And so those are kind of some of the things you did. Now, I guess my next question would be, when you were kind of overcoming these obstacles and getting to the place where you are now, did your practice look the same, or did you maybe focus more on a structured practice to kind of be able to get to this place where it kind of comes a little bit more naturally to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I needed the discipline. I needed a little bit more of a rigid practice, especially the physical practice. So like I really got into a lot more like power vinyasa, or just like more intense vinyasa, where it was very, very structured and it was very, very physical, because I needed that. I was so dissociated from my body, and really my body awareness was shit back then. And so I needed that that dedicated asana and vinyasa practice, and also pranayama, like you said, it's more something that we're doing where there's a sensory input going on, right? Before I could ever sit still. But the meditation came pretty quickly, actually. I was pretty surprised. And I think that, I have a really great meditation teacher, and I learned a lot understanding that we shouldn't demonize the mind or the brain, right? So like we have these amazing brains that have evolved. And so the fact that like you have an active mind and a lot of people have active minds where you're just constantly creating and categorizing and making sense of things, like that's a gift. And so rather than thinking like, damn it, here's my brain going again a mile a minute, I'm trying to do this meditation thing, like why can't I just like beat my brain into submission, right? Not saying that that's what you do, but that's a lot of people's approaches, right? Of just like, oh my, this monkey mind, right? It's driving me crazy, I just can't sit still, or I can't meditate. I think that if we change our relationship to it and be like, oh wow, look at that amazing, incredible, intelligent brain I've got working, like that's so cool, I love that you're doing that, brain, but right now I'm asking you to do something else. So like, let's focus on breathing and like chilling out for a minute, and we'll get back to creating and doing all these amazing things that you're so good at in like 10 minutes, right? And so like literally having a conversation with myself when I first started my meditation practice of like, we're just going to do a 10-minute break because I want my brain to be really good at a lot of things. And so I want it to be good at pausing and like chilling out for a hot minute and just taking some time to be and observe, and then we'll get right back to it. I promise,
And I don't mean to cut you off, but I think that what you just said was awesome. And I think the audience listening right now, just to kind of put that point across, where it's like a monkey mind and an active mind is not necessarily a bad thing, because it leads to creativity and it means you're passionate. Like maybe that A-type personality it's not a bad thing. It's just like, that's who you are. And you just have to learn how to control that and have that off switch. Because sometimes when I'm too passive and I'm just like, la, 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 like in nature. And I'm like, I'm sad. I kind of crave that creativity again, but sometimes that creativity overthrows your mind and it just becomes overwhelming. And it's like trying to find that balance is super important. So I just wanted to make that point across. So everyone listening is like, just because you have this monkey mind, it's like, you don't want your mind to be totally blank. It's just that you want to be able to channel that in a way that's useful and have that off switch. So it's not overwhelming and it's not leads to more stress. So yeah, you could continue. Sorry to cut you off.
Oh, no worries. Yeah. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the importance of rest, right? And so not just like physical rest for our bodies, but that mental rest. I know that when I've got those ideas too, I'm very much a creative as well. I could go a week in front of the computer where I'm just like, cranking out content, and then you hit burnout, and then it might be like 3 weeks before I'm like able to even open my computer again. And so it's like moderating and like learning how to rest and taking those breaks, whether it's just going outside or taking a 10-minute meditation break in between, maybe 4 hours of work or whatever. Rest is so important. And I think that we don't give it as much credit as we need to. I know that I have a lot of students that would prefer to skip Shavasana, and I always ask them, I'm like, you just worked so hard moving your body, like just give yourself this gift of doing nothing. Like we are constantly being asked of throughout life, right? Whether it's through work or relationships or whatever it might be, like there's a constant demand, even on ourselves, right? Like we expect a lot from ourselves. So there's this constant demand of like energy expenditure, and it's like, take a second to just refuel, like re-energize, give yourself a second to not have to do anything. Like no one's asking you to do anything except just chill, like just accept that for a moment. But I think it can be hard for sure. But yeah, hopefully I answered your questions. I think I was rambling a little.
No, yeah, you started answering it. And I think so it sounds like you had more of a formal practice kind of leading up to where you are now. And that structure led you to kind of be where you are now and be able to kind of integrate that take the yoga and meditation and the breathing techniques into real life. So when you're sitting at the computer, when you're going for a walk, and that's a super important point to get across, where it's like, the structured formal practices are very important, especially in the beginning, and they shouldn't be overlooked. It might not be the sexy thing to do. It's like you want to go hit the gym and lift weights or go for that long distance run, and that's totally fine. But integrating kind of something that's more aware, and you could integrate awareness into weightlifting or running too. It's just yoga really kind of is structured, and the purpose of the asanas is to kind of integrate mind body awareness. So I mean, I would recommend like start with that. And even if you start learning that, I think too, like when you're in the gym and you're lifting weights and you're really aware of the contractions in the muscles. But yeah, I mean, I think that's beautifully said. And my next question is, you've traveled a lot. So in your travels, what either styles of yoga or kind of practices? So these, we were just talking about your unique practice and what kind of now and what led you to this point, but what you see in your travels that help people live like a happy, healthy lifestyle that make life beautiful. Because you've seen many different I guess different communities and aspects of that. So is it like the community? Is it the diet? Is it daily prayer, meditation? Is it a formal practice? Like kind of what is it that you see that makes life beautiful from these different cultures?
I'm just now thinking about some of the happiest places I've been. I think that, as a traveler, right, which is really different than a tourist. The tourist is mostly going to the places that the tourists are intended to
Mm,
go, and they see what they're intended to see. And so it's a very picturesque depiction, perhaps, of what the culture or the country might provide. I've definitely been a tourist in a lot of ways, but for the most part, I'm a traveler. And what that means is I'm staying in homestays, and I'm staying for as long as I possibly can, sometimes up to a month or longer. Obviously, I'm very aware of my privilege that allows me to do those things, but I try to go off the beaten path as much as I can. And I really, when I travel, my favorite thing is to like build relationships with locals. And so I have a lot of really awesome friends that I've made in India, in Peru, in Bali, like all over the world that I'm still in touch with. Like we'll email each other once in a while, or we're on WhatsApp and we'll chat. I'll hear from them every once in a while. And I think that the most important takeaway that I've received from traveling and just seeing how different people live, everybody wants the same thing. Like everyone wants to live a life that is fairly free of suffering, right? Where there isn't unnecessary struggle. And they want to provide for their families. Like that's all that anybody I've ever encountered wants. And I think that's true across the board. Like just our human nature is we want, our nature isn't to fight. Our nature isn't to constantly struggle. Our nature is to work really hard, or for our ancestors to work really hard so that eventually we can move more into a life of ease, a life of enjoyment, a life of delight. Now that doesn't mean that we're not working or that it's necessarily easy, but working with our natural surroundings, working with our environment, with our communities, with our culture, so that there's more harmony and less resistance. And I think that some of the most profound traveling experiences that I've ever had, Peru is probably on the top of my list. I've spent like a collective 3 months in Peru, traveling all over. And one of the things that stands out the most in Peru to me, and of course, there's different regions and different cities and different areas that this isn't necessarily true, but for the most part, in like the Sacred Valley, you don't see homelessness. You don't see folks that are lacking. There's a huge community responsibility. When I asked my good friend Valentine about this, I was like, I just can't help but notice how clean, like Cusco, for example, the capital of the Sacred Valley, how clean Cusco is, and how all the dogs, like the stray dogs, are like super well fed and friendly, and like nobody is, abusing them, out in public at least. I don't know what happens behind closed doors, but everyone seems for the most part in like this rhythm, right? Like, the dogs are there, the people are there, like just everyone's kind of doing their own thing. And it's this symbiotic relationship of collaboration and working together. And when I asked him about that, I was like, what's the deal? And he said, it's our responsibility to take care of each other. He said, we truly believe, and he's of Incan descent. He's a Quechuan man. And he calls me sister all the time. And I was like, like what's with this culture? Like, why you're all so warm and welcoming, and I've never felt afraid traveling alone as a single female here. And he's like, we truly believe that we have to take care of each other and that we're all family. And I thought it was kind of just like this cute, kitschy thing that maybe he called me sister just because that's like a thing, I'm this gringo in his country, and that's maybe what he does. But truly every single person he encounters in the market or we're walking by, it's like, hello sister, hello brother. And like, they all call each other sister and brother, and how there's this amazing fabric of their society that's interwoven and interconnected. And they truly take care of each other. And that was one of the most beautiful things I ever witnessed. And that's why I probably keep going back to Peru. I just love it so much. But that takes place across cultures, across borders, across boundaries. And, that happens within our communities as well. I think that if we were to perhaps think on a global scale that way of taking care of each other, maybe there would be a little bit more harmony, a little bit more peace. But yeah, my travels around have definitely shown me that ultimately, as human beings, we all want the same thing. And it might look different and it might appear different, but really what is at the heart of it, it's all the same.
Yeah. Wow. That's just beautiful. And I really never kind of thought about it in that aspect, but kind of through some of my travels, I see kind of what you're talking about, and you just put it beautifully. So that's, yeah, I do see that, where it's like we all really want the same thing. And you really kind of discern, like, as a traveler, not so much as a tourist. And that's how I like to travel too. When I had the opportunity to kind of travel for longer times, you really kind of feel and see the culture, which
Yeah.
is awesome. And there's ways to do it. I mean, you don't have to, you just show. It's like, I'm sure they don't practice asana for an hour a day. It's like, or they don't sit there and meditate, but maybe it's prayer, maybe it's writing, maybe it's community gatherings. And yeah, I mean, there's like the book, The Blue Zones, where they talk about kind of like, what are the things that kind of, that's where I kind of got the question from. And there's also a book, 50 Secrets of the Longest Living People by Sally Bear. That was actually created way before the Blue Zones, which was one of my favorite books. And they talk about things just
Oh,
like you're talking about.
does she mention in the book by chance the island of Dominica? It's they have the world's largest population of centurions, so like people over
Really?
100.
And
Yeah,
where is that located?
Dominica. So it's down island south. It's like in between. St. Vincent is a little bit closer. So if you've heard of St. Vincent,
Mm-hmm.
it's further south in the Caribbean. But I traveled through there, again, backpacking through like their whole country, their island. And yeah, they have the largest number of people that are over 100 years old. And
Wow.
I was so like intrigued by that. I'm like, what's the deal? I would ask everybody I encountered that was like up for conversation and hanging out. And they're like, it's coconut oil. So lots of coconut oil. But they
Yeah.
also said, it's, they don't have much. It's a pretty impoverished nation overall, but they have a lot in heart and they have a lot in abundance. Like there is so much food, it's basically just like rotting in the street because they have so much fresh mangoes falling from the trees at all
Wow.
times. Right.
Yeah.
And one of my friends that I made in Dominica, he said to me, he's like, I truly believe that we could solve hunger in most of the Caribbean if a boat would just come and pick up all of our food, because we have such an abundance. Like we have so much here. And
Mm-hmm.
it's really beautiful. Like just even that global mindset there on a small island, right? Where it's like, we actually have the capacity to help other people, but sometimes there's these obstacles in the way, right?
Yeah, there's enough to go around, and there's so many hidden gems of places like that. I don't think she particularly mentioned that island, but there's so many of those islands, and there's one in Greece, because I'm Greek, so I have to mention it. But
Oh,
it's like,
nice.
it's not the coconut oil, it's the olive oil, and
Yes, yes.
it's the fish, it's the fresh air. But what really it is it's the mindset, and that's
Totally.
huge, and that overcomes so many physical ailments that we deal with today in our culture, and that mindset of abundance too, and abundance, love, kindness, and spreading it. So my question that I always like to ask, and I've asked this before, was I like to ask basically guests who have dogs, what yogic lessons have you learned from your four-legged companion, or canine sidekick, as I like to call it?
She totally is a sidekick. So our dog Tula is a sweet, sweet pit bull that we rescued a little over a year ago when our first rescue dog died at 15 years. And so we've got Tula now, and she came literally off of death row. She was to be put down actually the weekend that we called about her, because she was really, really sick with heartworm, and she had been really badly abused, and nobody was interested in her because she had mange, and she was pretty gnarly looking. But I like saw her and instantly fell in love. So my husband went and got her and brought her back, and it took us a really long time to sort of have a breakthrough with her. She was always sweet and very submissive, but she was terrified of everything. She had never been inside of a house very clearly because she was terrified of the threshold of the door. She was scared of the hardwood floors, stairs, furniture, like everything was new and terrifying. But it took a while to build some trust with her. And once we did build trust with her, she just like really blossomed into this like hilarious, goofy, adorable, just an absolute delight. And the thing that we love most about Tula, and all of the neighbors say it too, like she's always happy to see you. Like it could be the very first time she's ever met you or the 1000th time she's met you. And she is just like gonna go crazy, wiggle so much her whole body wags and roll over on her back for belly scratches. And that's exactly how she is in the morning. Like the moment one of our alarms goes off, you hear the tail start. And then when one of us moves in bed, she jumps off of her bed and comes over to us, and she's on top of us, pinning us, kissing us. And she's just so excited for the day to start. Like, she's just like, yes, I have another day. I can't wait to like get out there and live my life. And she's just like the happiest dog. She finds delight in everything. Like, she's just so happy all the time. And the fact that she came from such a terrible situation where she was like very badly abused and neglected for, she's about 7 years old. So about 6 years of her life, she was living probably in a cage or chained up. It never broke her spirit, like she is still this vibrant, like zest for life, like so delighted in everything. And I think that's like really important. My neighbor said it best. He was like, I think it's so incredible that she still loves people even after everything that's happened to her. And yeah, she's the ultimate yogi, I think, because she never gives up on love, on compassion, on connection. Like even everything she's been through, she's still determined to connect with everyone she meets and just loves life.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And she's just, so I always say it's a great day to have a great day. And that's how she seems like she's living very in the present moment. And yeah, every day is a great day and it's a new day and that's awesome. Yeah, that's a great story. I see your pictures on Instagram and of Tula.
Tula, yeah,
Tula,
which is
yeah.
sweet.
Oh, yeah, no, it is. I actually have some relatives named that. Yeah, no, that's awesome. And it's a beautiful, beautiful story. So I wish you and Tula the best. And the last question is, what's next for you in terms of maybe it's entrepreneurial, maybe it's spiritual, maybe it's with your teachings or your students, and where can listeners find you?
Well, as I mentioned before about, anxiety being through the roof right now during this pandemic, as my husband and I are about to transition our big lives, we're going to be leaving North Carolina shortly. He is, getting out of the military, and we're both really excited about it. And we're starting our lives over in Austin, Texas. So I've never been to Austin. I'm really excited about this new adventure. So if anyone is going to be in Austin or is in Austin, be sure to hit me up. But as far as business-wise for me, I'm really excited to launch a mentorship program that the first cohort is going to start in September. And I was inspired to do this to really help other yoga teachers and educators and professionals that are maybe feeling like they're lacking that community connection and the inspiration of collaboration, just being around your peers in the studio setting now that we're all isolated and working from our homes. And just giving like those tips of what helped me. I've been teaching for a decade now. What's helped me over the years, like find my voice and find my niche and understand that, coming from teaching from your heart, it doesn't ever have to be perfect as long as it's authentic and it's from your own experience. And so I'm really excited about that. And I've got some other online courses rolling out soon, but folks can find me on Instagram. It's my name, Sarah Kadel Yoga. And my website is the same, sarahkadelyoga.com.
Awesome. Yeah. And I'll link to all that in the show notes below. And Sarah, thank you so much for being on the Life as a Secret Yogi podcast and sharing your life as a secret yogi.
Thanks for having me, Austin. It was great fun.
Thank you so much for joining this episode. I hope you loved this conversation. If you're the type of person who has taken action to make life beautiful through the tools of yoga, I'd really appreciate if you headed over to iTunes and left us a raving review to keep this show going. Every review is read by myself, the host, and your feedback will most definitely be taken into account for future episodes. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Have an extraordinary rest of your day, and remember, our actions and thoughts are contagious, so make them good ones.